Good morning. This week we're going to be going over genetics in science. And you guys don't have this new interactive notebook sheet, so you can either make notes with this one, or I'm going to leave a copy of it on Google Classroom so that you can either copy it into your notes and make a new sheet, or if you have a printer, you can print it off or just use it right from Google Classroom, whatever you prefer. But the first thing is genetics, and just so that you know what genetics is the study of how genes interact and how traits are passed down from parent to offspring. So that might be any parent, whether that parent is an animal or whether that parent is a human. And so a large part of how you look and how you act is determined by genetics. So to continue on with that, the first part of the notes is heredity. I'm sure you've all heard about inheritance. Oh, you've inherited that from your parents, or you inherited that from your grandparents, or something in line with that. But heredity is the passage of genetic traits. Genetic, keyword, comes from genes, G-E-N-E, not jeans like the jeans you wear. From one generation to the next. Generation meaning you and or your siblings are one generation, your parents are another generation, their grandparents are another generation, like when you make a family tree. The next part of the notes is heredity is controlled by chromosomes. Chromosomes is a keyword here that's going to be in Edpuzzle. It's going to be on the Google Forms assessment. So heredity is controlled by chromosomes. And chromosomes are made of genes. Those little chromosomes are made of genes. During reproduction, genes move from one generation to the next on chromosomes. So we said earlier in the notes that our genes, our genetic traits, are passed from one generation to the next. So if they're passed from one generation to the next, they are passed from one generation to the next on the chromosomes. So our genes are passed on the chromosomes. Therefore, our heredity is controlled by the chromosomes. So we're going to go over now the two types, just to refer back, our two types of reproduction, which we've gone over for several weeks now, are the asexual and sexual. This should not be new to you, but asexual comes from one parent. So you have all the genes come from one parent. All those genes passed on from the chromosomes, so they travel from the chromosomes and they come from one parent. That's why in asexual reproduction, the offspring look identical to the parent, because it all comes from one parent. Sexual reproduction, we know sexual reproduction, there are two parents involved in sexual reproduction. So each parent contributes half of the genes. So each parent contributes half of the genes, and therefore the offspring are not identical because you're not receiving all the genes from one parent. You're going to have part of the genes from one parent and part of the genes from the other parent. And that gets us to where our genes come from, and that is we have dominant genes and we have recessive genes. Dominant and recessive genes, where the dominant gene is the trait that appears in an individual. When we do this, and when you do this next week, we're going to be making something called a Punnett square. You're actually going to have the dominant gene represented by a capital letter. That's very important. Dominant gene is going to be represented by a capital letter. The recessive genes are hidden by the dominant gene. Recessive are hidden, and they are going to be represented by a lowercase letter. Now, what that means, I'll give you just a quick example of that, is we get half of our genes, which are carried down by the chromosomes. We get half of the genes from our parents. So for each trait, there are a lot of traits. So remember this, traits that can be inherited from our parents, things like freckles, our hair color, whether our hair is curly, our muscle structure, our bone structure, the shape of our nose, or whether we're left-handed or right-handed. Things that cannot be inherited, you're not going to inherit your food preference. You're not going to inherit your manners. Those are things that you learn, but you inherit through genes, things like freckles and eye color. For example, eye color. For eye color, we're going to have each one of those inherited traits has 2 letters. So for each one of those traits, so eye color would have a letter that goes here and a letter that goes here. So if this was you, your eye color would have 2 letters here. One would represent whatever color your eyes are. So for eye color, you're going to have, let's say, a capital letter B. Capital stands for the dominant gene. And capital B is, let's say, brown eyes. Brown eyes are dominant. Brown eyes are dominant over, that's a lowercase. Lowercase stands for the recessive gene. Recessive, if you have blue eyes are a recessive trait. So brown eyes and blue eyes. Brown eyes are dominant if you have a capital letter B for one of your traits. So there's 3 possible combinations you could have for your eyes if you had B's. Say this person or your parents had 3 offspring, 1 sibling, 2 sibling, 3 sibling, right here. 1 sibling had capital B, capital B. 1 sibling had capital B, lowercase b. And 1 sibling had lowercase b, lowercase b. Well, we said that dominant genes, if you have a dominant gene, it's going to show up. If you have a recessive gene, it's hidden by the dominant gene. So I have this recessive gene right here, the blue eyes, they're hidden by the dominant. So this person, this sibling is going to have brown eyes. This person has a brown eye gene and a blue eye gene, but the brown eye is hidden. Doesn't mean they're going to have 1 brown eye and 1 blue eye. No, they're going to have, this gene is hidden. They're going to have brown eyes. They both have 2 lowercase b's. They have nothing to hide the blue eyes. So this person is actually going to have blue eyes. We'll learn more about how to calculate that next week. But right now, just so that you know, the dominant genes, capital letter, recessive, lowercase letter, and the recessive are covered up by the dominant if there's a dominant in the 2 of the genes. The next thing is hybrid. Hybrid is where the offspring of the parents have different forms of a trait. Since only one trait is different, the offspring is called monohybrid. So hybrid, think of hybrid cars. I know you guys have seen those and heard of those. Hybrid car is where you have two very distinct different kinds of things going on in the car. So for example, you have a gas engine and you also have an electric motor. You've probably heard of hybrid plants. Anybody who gardens has hybrid plants and you've seen those. Here also is an example of hybrid fruit. So for an example, here's a plum and a cherry for a pluery, a peach and a nectarine, and it's called a peacherine, and a plum and an apricot for a pluot. I'm sure you've also seen other hybrid fruit out there. There's mini kiwi, there's seedless apples. I think I've seen in Sam's Club before those, which I love, the cotton candy grapes. Those are hybrid fruit. So make sure, if we go back to these notes, if you look at these notes here, and I'm going to be putting them up on the classroom as well so that you can look those over and have those to do with your assessment and also with the stuff I've discussed. That will be on Google Classroom along with the Ed Puzzle. Have a great day.